With these, if you wanted to check out my YouTube page, you can watch slides, listen to anything that you may have missed in the past. YouTube has its uses, and it's free, but it is video format. Proverbs 2, 1 through 15. A second set of commands. Sort of. We're not going to see direct commands in this passage, but they're parallel with commands, and there's a reason for that. But here we have more of the desperate need for wisdom and what we must do with it. It kind of breaks down. Verses 1 through 22 really is one single sentence. We thought Paul would write long sentences. Ephesians 1, 3 through 14, that is one sentence. Solomon has a beat here because we have 22 verses in one sentence. Because it carries through an idea that progresses. First we have what we must do with regard to wisdom. We must pursue wisdom passionately, as verses 1 through 4 tell us. We have a lot of if statements. If you pursue wisdom passionately, and that word will repeat itself throughout this text. And then in verses 5 through 11, if you pursue wisdom passionately, then you will have it, and you will be blessed. Lots of then statements in verses 5 through 11. That, of course, are dependent on the if statements. Then, after we finish with verses 5 through 11, we see deliverance. 12 through 22 speaks heavily of deliverance and rescue from much evil as a result of pursuing wisdom passionately, being blessed with the wisdom that you'll get as a result. Because of those things, you're delivered from a lot of trouble. It's a very logical, sensible progression, and the desperate nature that we have of it. Not just obtaining this wisdom, but continuing to seek after this wisdom. And the source of this wisdom, for it to come to us in the first place, will definitely be highlighted. So, we'll get into that with verse 1. In fact, I'm going to read verses 1 through 4 all together. And then we'll break it down from there. Solomon writes, "My son, if you receive my words and treasure up my commandments with you, making your ear attentive to wisdom and inclining your heart to understanding. Yes, if you call out for insight and raise your voice for understanding, if you seek it like silver and search for it as for hidden treasures." I'm going to break there up with the comma in the text. It's all one sentence anyway, so we're going to kind of break it up as it goes. But what do we have it starting? "My son, if you receive my words and treasure up my commandments with you." You can see the parallel structure. Receiving his words is parallel with treasuring up his commandments within you. Receive. You need a commitment to receive his words. Not just something to hear. Of course, we do have the command to hear throughout this text. But to receive something, to internalize it, to process it, to maintain it. This involves a level of commitment. It requires skill. Parallel that with, say, learning to ride a bicycle. You don't just hop on a bicycle and expect to get too far on it if you've never done it before. It does take some level of practice. It takes training. It takes commitment. It takes a few bumps and bruises and scrapes every now and then. Sure, if you've never been on a bicycle before, you hop on, you might get a few feet, and you had an experience that you hadn't had before. Okay, but have you really ridden the bicycle? Not really. In fact, it may not necessarily even seem beneficial at first. God's wisdom, certainly in the eyes of the world, is not beneficial. The whole idea of try Jesus and see if you'll like him is stupid. It's not biblical. Not at all. It requires commitment. It requires an actual receiving. Receiving his words. What are his words? We've seen some of them already. And this father, Solomon, my son, we have that communication again, of course, broadening out for everyone, which we talked about before. There are sayings in these collections that follow, and as I mentioned, there really aren't any direct commands, but the funny thing is, you see where it's parallel. Receiving the teacher's words, the parent's words, Solomon's words, whoever it is who's instructing this person is parallel with treasuring up commands. Why is that?
Can we use accept or to accept?
To accept his words, to accept the command? Sure, that comes, I mean, yeah, I would certainly say that's involved. So you see,
I think treasuring is going beyond just accepting, but valuing highly.
Valuing highly, yes. This treasuring Certainly going beyond accepting, though accepting certainly is there.
Yeah.
But treasuring up his commands, you also need to remember the person writing this. Solomon was the one who also constructed the temple, was overseeing that particular project, and the temple had a treasury within it. A treasury where the offerings were brought in and they were stored up to meet the needs of the Levites, among other things. Treasuring, keep it safe, protecting it. To treasure up his commands, by the way, parallel with his words, the idea is, even though these sayings are just kind of collections of wise words, they do function as commands. They're not just meant to have things brought into our minds like, oh, this is kind of nice to know, or hey, I've accumulated this knowledge and therefore I should be fine. No, they're to be taken as words that we need to obey. That we are to be living our lives in light of these wisdom sayings that we have been able to internalize, and therefore our lives are going to be different. Obeying them as commands and treasuring them up as such. Matthew 13:44 comes to mind when I see the idea of treasuring up the command to see how valuable it truly is. I'll switch my Bible here real quick because I've got bookmarks in another section. Matthew 13:44, Jesus was saying this: the kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and covered up. Then in his joy he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. To treasure something is not just to consider it valuable, it certainly is considered supremely valuable. To the point that we are willing to lay down whatever else may be encumbering us, that's keeping us from going after this, so that we can see, okay, these words, these commands, these are supreme, they are really valuable, and I need to treat them as such and make them that much a part of my life, that much a prize in my affections. So that when I think of something that is valuable, I think of God's Word, and what He has said, higher than really anything else. Because it is God's Word, and because it truly has value, unlike many of the things around us. So to treasure them up, how will we go about treasuring up these commands within us?
Well, if you have a treasure like silver or gold, you always know where it is, you always protect it. If it's jewelry or something, you keep it someplace where no one else can get to it. And if we're acting that way about the Word, we care about our Bibles. We care about knowing, we care about where it is and protecting it, and then internalizing it because it's special to us.
Possibly seeking, of course, taking it in, reading and studying and hearing and memorizing it would be something else to keep in mind. You have to remember that in this particular society, the people, though they were literate, writing materials were kind of scarce. And even if people could read, they didn't necessarily have the ability simply to pull out a piece of paper with the words written on it to go ahead and going over it that way. They had to internalize it in their minds, to hear it, to memorize it, to be able to keep it in front of them that way. So if we are truly treasuring the Word of God, certainly hear it, certainly read it, work to memorize it, repeat it to yourself again and again, so that you can have this Word, these commands, ready to present to whatever situation comes at you. If you've read it, that is to some degree available, but not to the level that it's going to be if you haven't memorized it. It's actually part of who you are in that regard. Then you can then the Spirit of God will bring such understanding to the surface when it is necessary.
And it can't bring anything to the surface if it's not in there. So if we're not internalizing the Word when we need it, there's nothing to bring up.
Much truth to that. I don't know how to say can't, because of course the Spirit of God can do whatever He wants.
Can,
but won't might be a right way to say that, because that's how He chooses to operate. He brings forward into our minds what we have put into our minds, so that we remember it when the time comes. If we haven't processed it, if we haven't received these words and we treasure God's commands, then we're going to find ourselves, in many cases, defenseless when presented with problems in our lives that require that kind of knowledge and understanding. He says to receive His words, and the next verse in verse 2, making your ear attentive to wisdom and inclining your heart to understanding. Once again, a synonymous parallel structure. Make your ear attentive to wisdom. Making your ear attentive, very simply, what does that mean?
Listen.
Listen. Pay attention. We've seen that kind of an admonition quite a bit through here already. Pay attention. Hear this. Get this. Listen to it. Take it in.
Is that why a lot of stuff is repeated in the Bible?
Oh, yes.
So over and over and over, because
oh, yes.
how else are you going to remember.
Yeah, because like I said, even though they, like Dave said, even though they had this written, for the vast majority of people, it was an oral tradition. It was an oral tradition that had to be preserved exactly because it's the Word of God, but nevertheless, it was mostly oral and spoken and memorized. That's why they knew. I mean, your average Jew back in the day, I mean, had a lot, if not most, of the scriptures they had memorized.
Because even though you had a much more literate society in Hebrew culture than most other places around, people didn't have Bibles in their houses, typically, because they had them available in the tabernacle.
Yeah, a community would have one, and it would be at the tabernacle. It would be at the synagogue, at the place of worship.
Sure.
And highly, highly prized.
But in there, doesn't it say that you should write it on your doorpost and on the lintels and have the word always available?
Certainly.
You didn't have to have a Bible to put God as the king or whatever.
Oh, sure. Like the Shema, for example, some of those things in Hebrew Israelites would recite that multiple times a day. Have it written down, but again, to internalize and memorize it. It's not an either or, but a both and. I mean, in our society, which has the written text available so readily, in digital formats even, we're really left without much of an excuse. But be that as it may, make your ear attentive. Pay attention. Pay attention. Take this stuff in, listen to it, and then it goes beyond that. Pay attention. Make your ear attentive to wisdom. You see, it's not just level of education again. Wisdom gets parallel with knowledge here later on, which I think is fascinating. But wisdom is to be a vehicle for living. It means our hearts have been changed, which is part of this verse as well, so that our method of living is consistent with wisdom. Our hearts are to be inclined, they are to be turned toward understanding. So that says the heart. It's a term that doesn't translate necessarily very well. What exactly is the heart and the understanding that is coming forward here in this text? Because you have your mind and you have your heart. Of course, your heart is your blood pumping muscle. Biologically, it doesn't do any thinking or anything like that. But what is the idea here?
Oh, that's the kind of thinking that your spirit, how you feel about things, think about
The seat of
things.
the emotions.
Yeah.
That has something to do with it.
It's just kind of your center, your core.
The center, the core, the inner man, the processing of why we do what we do is like what's your heart in it or not. Think of it as a decision maker in this regard. So the heart, the core of who you are, what you are going to be deciding to hear and see. This is what Solomon is getting at. Incline, center of your being, the inner man, the why you do what you do. This kind of inclining needs to be to understanding. Understanding wisdom, parallel, your vehicle for living. And now it intensifies. In fact, let's reread verse 3. Someone reread verse 3. Oh, good question.
In verse 2, that makes me think of, like, when you're reading the word, sometimes you read it and you just read it. And then you think, well, what did I read? You have to go back. It says, incline your heart to understanding. There are other times when you're reading it and you want to know what it's saying to you. You know what I mean?
Sure. It's one thing to read it very quickly and then return it back.
That's what that reminds
read
me
it.
of, is rather than just reading, the commandments and the Bible, that we focus on it and try to understand what it's about.
I think it does no good unless you can apply it. Application is the key. I mean, you can know all the words, but what does that mean to me? What should I be doing?
Right.
How does that affect me? And make no mistake, it's supposed to affect us. In fact,
That's what Solomon is crying out for.
exactly. Speaking of crying out,
Don't just,
Yes.
don't just listen to it, but let it become part of you.
hence that vehicle for living we're talking about moments ago with regard to wisdom. It's supposed to change you, to incline your heart, make your decisions, your inner man conform to what it is we're talking about here. Again, this is not just some level of head knowledge. This is supposed to be something that changes our hearts, our lives. To simply have taken in theological knowledge and simply have it be head knowledge is not to understand what God has said at all.
Satan has a lot of head knowledge about
No,
God.
more than we do. Something to keep in
And
mind.
he knows his scriptures.
Verse 3. Somebody read me verse 3 again.
Yes, if you call out for insight and raise your voice for understanding.
Yes. Why say yes? Because he's intensifying it. He just gave truths in verses 1 and 2. Incline your heart to understanding. Have this wisdom. Yes! if you call out for insight and raise your voice for understanding, not just listening to it, take it in this way, but to cry out for it. The desire would be that intense. It's like, don't just be satisfied with hearing this. Call out to God for it. This is an aggressive initiation for a quest to get knowledge. That's what the word yes is. It's an intensifier. Raise your voice. Cry out to God to have this understanding. Why intensify it? Why put this admonition in there?
Because it's what you got to have if you're going to get what you need to get.
It really is what we need. He intensifies it to highlight its importance, first of all. Because it's like, okay, I told you this, you need to listen, you need to pay attention, your heart needs to be changed for this. Now really, really, call out for this. See, I'm not just saying this to be heard, or to write a nice book of Proverbs, that some little trite saying that you might say, well, that's a good idea. No, no, no. This is critical. And it's so critical, you need to spend time calling out for it. Calling out to who?
That's what I was going to say. The calling out and the raising your voice reminds me of the idea that we should pray before we study.
Indeed. As we're studying and as we conclude, we cry out for insight and raise our voice for understanding. Why? Because true wisdom and knowledge come from God. And if we are not spending our time calling out for it, we're not going to have it. And not just simply thinking, oh, this is, okay, well, yeah, I need to pray, Lord God, help me understand. But really realizing our absolute dependence on God in order to internalize this in the first place. We do not have the ability in and of ourselves to process God's knowledge, His wisdom. Do not. If we did, the verse 3 wouldn't be here. Make sense?
I just have recently had an experience with that. I've read about it a couple times.
Sure.
But I've always been hesitant about Revelations because of everything people say. And even though I've read it a couple times, I'm like, ooh, I don't want to know about all this, you know? I'm not going to be here, so who cares? So,
You don't know that.
I'm hoping. So this time I'm reading it, I'm going through and trying to finish it. I just prayed and I said, God, help me not to be scared. And help me to get what you want me to get out of it. And help me not to feel like it don't apply to me, so I don't care. And I was reading the beginning. I have that MacArthur Study Bible, and in the beginning it explains the whole thing. And he's going, it's about Christ. I'm like, yeah, it's about Christ. I see it now.
Oh, yeah.
Unreal. All the things that he's doing to all these people. And then God says, and on mine, cover them. And I'm like, oh, he covers us under whatever's going to happen. I mean, if he's pouring out all this turmoil on everybody else, and those that have come up that have been saved, it says right there to cover them with my seal, or they've been covered with my seal. Before he pours out that bowl, that last bowl, I'm like, oh, we are covered with the seal of Christ. And
that really is a lot of the focus in Revelation that you mentioned.
I had
It's
no
about Christ and His
idea.
protection of His people throughout all of these trials and tribulations.
Exactly, but in
No matter what
relation,
eschatological perspective, you'll have to understand that.
yeah, in relation to what you said, I'd never asked God to help me with it before. And then he did. And it was like, oh, now I love it.
There you go.
So it
Excellent.
works. It does work if you ask. You receive not because you ask not.
Building out verse 4, if you seek it like silver and search for it as for hidden treasure. Seek it like silver, not just a piece of ore you're pulling out of the ground either. The idea with this silver is mined silver, a smelted and refined pure silver, which has great value, of course. I say that rather than gold. No, gold is implied with the hidden treasure idea. Again, just kind of building on it, using an emblematic parallelism to intensify it. And what's our intensifying word here? In the middle of it, if you seek it like silver and search for it as for hidden treasure. If treasure is hidden, what you got to do? You got to look for it. You got to pursue it. You got to do what you have to do in order to find it. Does it require effort? Yes, it does. A great deal of effort must be expended. Sacrifice must be had in order to get this. And he says to do it, but oh, it's going to be hard to get it. Yes, it is, but it's worth it and it's needed. Extreme effort on the part of the person who needs wisdom is required. But I thought it came from God. Yes, it does. So why are we having to work so hard? Because God uses means. We're going to build on that again here in a moment.
And because Satan throws stuff at you. When you've decided, you're going to really study, Satan will get your kids sick, or you lose your glasses. I mean, Satan will do everything to keep you from being committed to that study.
It's true.
And we value things more than we've had to work for.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like, I mean, you get that from, take a 10-year-old and give him $10 and it'll be gone. Take a 10-year-old and make him show a walk for $10. He'll value that a lot higher.
Yes, he will.
Than he will value the one that he got in the birthday card.
Yeah.
It should be, unless the vast majority of children, that's true at least.
Well, generally speaking, that is true across the board. We can see that with regard to, you can see that with regard to certain government programs too. If all that is just to hand out money without requirement, if all of it, no matter who you are, you're not going to respect it. You're not going to be grateful for it. Again, if you're going to shovel a walk or mow a lawn or do something in order to earn it, then you have value to it. That's really is the issue there. There is work involved. I'm sure that has something to do with why this is worded in this way and why it is necessary for us to search out. We value it more when there's sacrifice involved. How God puts us through that in order to grant to us the hidden treasure, the precious secret treasure. Not secret knowledge. Let's not talk about Gnostics. Secret treasure, because there is deep work involved that God will grant to us. So there are if statements. If you do this, if you do this, if you do this. Verse 5. So read verse 5, please. Next section.
Then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God.
Then, if verses 1 through 4 are true about you, then you might understand the fear of the Lord. Maybe the knowledge of God will come to you. No. There are promises here. If it's really true that you are passionately seeking after, seek after God Himself, because if we're going to have knowledge, again, chapter 1, verse 7, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fear of God, truly knowing this God, this all ties together with that. If we're truly calling out for insight and passionately pursuing the wisdom and knowledge of God, knowing it for the treasure that it is, and pursuing it intensely, you will understand the fear of the Lord. You will find the knowledge of God. Again, they're paralleled with each other. Fear of the Lord, knowledge of God. Chapter 1, verse 7. It keeps coming back to that. You will have this. The if then comes forward. So, go ahead.
What do they mean by the knowledge of God? Does that mean you'll know about God, or you will know what God wants you to know?
Yes.
You know what I mean?
I would say yes. Our knowledge and understanding of God Himself will increase, because the more we review His truth, which is His revelation of Himself, the more just general knowledge about God we will possess. And it will produce in us wisdom, the vehicle for living, the life change as well, if we're passionately doing this. It's not just having knowledge about God, but it is indeed obeying what it is He would have us do. It is both, because the fear of the Lord is going to produce in us life change.
It's just...
So...
It just makes me think, it makes me think about how great a lie the serpent had in the garden when he said, eat of this tree, do what God doesn't want you, and then you will know what God knows. Whereas Solomon is saying, you knew what God, you had that understanding, we had that understanding, and we've lost it. Or he isn't saying, like he said, but I'm getting that, Adam and Eve had that understanding, and they chose to give it away, and now they're going to have to work hard to get it back. We, as their children, have to work hard to get it back.
Interesting.
He did.
And it was such a backward thing.
It was very
Do this and
backwards.
you'll know. And Solomon says, and because we are foolish and naive and simple, we don't know. And now we have to work to get it back.
Well, it's something I think is, I think I can flow into this. One thing I find interesting, though, we complain sometimes, I know I have. Why then do we not understand? Why do we find sin so alluring at times? Because not understanding is the opposite of verse 5, isn't it?
Right.
The knowledge of God is going to be the opposite of sin, then it's allurement, because we're supposed to desire Him like hidden treasure. If we really are seeing it that way, that's what our desire is for. That's where the value is. But yet we still see sin as being so tempting and alluring. We just fail to grasp even sometimes basic understanding of how delightful God Himself is. Why?
Because we're covered, encased in a sinful body, which is used to having sin.
True.
Our body doesn't get converted.
I think part of it has to do with if you go back and to rewind back through verses 1 through 4, I would say generally, to the degree that we are thinking sin to be valuable rather than the hidden treasure of God's wisdom, and where we're lacking in our understanding. Now, I'm not saying everything in Scripture is going to be equally understandable. This much we know. We're talking about Revelation a little bit this morning. But to a degree, a very important degree, when we fail to grasp the understanding that verse 5 tells us that we will have, is because we failed in verses 1 through 4.
Yeah. If we're not trying to get the word, not trying to know the word, not internalizing the word, then we're going to fail. Period.
There is a great danger, and John and I were talking about this morning earlier before most everyone else showed up. A great danger in thinking that we have arrived.
Yep.
A great danger. It's like, wow, I have this understanding. We discover a new truth about our God, and we're excited about it. And we desire to love and thank Him and praise Him for it. We've internalized this, and there has been some level of life change, and we rejoice in that. But the wrong conclusion to draw from that is say, great, now I understand, and I can go forward now with this understanding and stop there.
But don't you think the more you learn, the more you realize you haven't arrived?
That is how we ought to view it.
Like if you read it like, oh
yes.
Man, I'm really messed up.
Because the fountain of our God is just that He's the fountain, the source of life and of understanding and of knowledge, and it's an infinite flow. But yet, in our human pride, maybe that's the right way to describe it. When we have understood some of this, dare we think that got it from ourselves in the first place, which is another serious error, sin, I will have to add. But we start to think, great, we're okay now. We have this understanding, we have this knowledge, this is what I've been pursuing, and then we think we're standing and we start to fall. Great danger.
The more I understand, it makes me more grateful instead of prideful. I'm like, God, thank you for showing this to me, and ooh, I got a long way to go, but I can't imagine prideful from God's Word.
But there's always so much more.
I know.
Verse 6 reminds us of something that helps us keep from being proud. Were you going to say something, though, real quick for the cross?
You ask why sin is so alluring to us. I once looked up that word "know." Where in Genesis they wanted knowledge. They wanted to know about
intimacy
sin.
Associated with that word.
Sin. That's what I was going to say. But they had, Satan plays on words. He said, you'll know as God knows. And they were thinking, mentally we'll know right from wrong. Where Satan was really talking about an intimate relationship with sin.
Clever. Interesting. I never really thought about that, but yeah. Very good. A reminder.
And I think the other thing to remember is just like with drugs, the reason why drugs are so addictive is not because they're horrible. They're addictive because they feel good for a short amount of time. And sin is the same way.
Sure.
It feels good for a short amount of time.
As it starts to rip you out from the inside.
When for that moment when you look at that girl in the jogging shorts the wrong way, get a little thrill for that. It's not a good one. But you get that little bonus, and then everything goes bad. And it's the same. It's the same thing when you it's the same thing with you just pick a sin, and there's a short-term gain and a long-term bad in almost every situation. And we are selfish, short-sighted, lazy people, and we want the good now and the bad, and we don't care so much about what's going to happen tomorrow.
Which flies in the face of what Solomon has told us with regard to the treasure.
Exactly.
A secret treasure that requires intense, diligent, sacrificial searching out. But what is it once you have sought it out and you start to have it? It is secret, valuable treasure, and it doesn't have the negative consequences associated with all the rest of it. See, the cheap, quick, easy fix ends up ruining us most of the time.
And you appreciate it more.
Oh, yes. Verse 6 gives us an important reminder. All of this diligent, passionate, work-hard seeking that Solomon has been writing about, he doesn't just let us think that somehow we can attain this of our own efforts. No, he does not. In verse 6, buries that idea forever. So please read verse 6.
For the Lord gives wisdom, from his mouth come knowledge and understanding.
We're supposed to have knowledge and understanding. He's used those words in this passage already. Where's it come from?
The Lord.
The Lord gives it. But haven't we been working really hard through all this? Haven't you been telling us to seek it out intensely? Sure he has. But he says, but wait, no, you need to understand something. Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth come knowledge and understanding. Knowledge and understanding parallel with wisdom. The Lord giving, parallel with from his mouth. He speaks it, he provides it, he gives it. The Son does not grasp wisdom in and of himself. The Lord bestows it upon him. How does it happen? The Lord gives it. But through what does it come?
Diligently searching and obedience.
Yes!
Obedience.
God gives it. Diligently searching, obedience. This is what it comes through. So how does that work? Because it kind of seems almost contradictory to us, doesn't it? In a way, I suppose so. One of my favorite passages, New Testament, that Paul writes in regard to this very subject. Philippians chapter 2, verses 3, or it's not verses 3, verses 12 and 13. Click the button a few times. It's digital turning pages anymore. Verses 12 and 13, as he writes to the church of Philippi, therefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, so now, not only as in my presence, but much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. Work it out. Work hard. Be afraid as you do so. Tremble as you do so. Partly because we're in the sinful world and we are prone as a tendency to sin. All right, so there's the work. That diligently seeking out kind of idea. But Paul says the same thing Solomon does in verse 6 in chapter 2 here. In verse 13 he says, for it is God who works in evil, to will and to work for his good pleasure. How is it you can work out your salvation with fear and trembling? But don't be hopeless in this, he says. God's the one working in you. Not just to work it out, but even to want to work it out.
Right. It's like salvation.
Sure.
We don't want to be saved. God gives us the desire. And then he saves us. Duh.
Isn't there still the element of the natural man? The natural man not being able to receive the things of
Sure.
the Spirit.
Which is why we are so desperate for the power of God to produce it in us, even as Christians.
Right.
We have the Spirit of God in us, the Spirit of God who convicts, who teaches, who reveals, who helps us that we might conform to Christ himself. But if we're really going to have this wisdom, again, it's the source is God. Sanctification is still something God does. And there are means, there are channels through which it comes. Reading, studying, praying, other kinds of spiritual disciplines. These things are great, and they're the channels through which God brings things, much in the same way as that faith is the vehicle that justification comes. But it is still the work of God that produces this in us. It cannot happen of our own efforts. It's impossible.
Right.
But we have that temptation to continue to think that way. As Paul says elsewhere in Galatians, like, okay, if you've begun by the Spirit, do you think you can somehow now be perfected in the flesh? Paul says, no, not how it works.
Right.
Not how it works. It can't work that way. All of life is grace. The Lord gives wisdom, Solomon says. The Lord gives wisdom. Verse 7 and also verse 8. He stores up sound wisdom for the upright. He's a shield to those who walk in integrity, guarding the paths of justice and watching over the way of his saints. Yes, we were told to search out hidden treasure. You see, because God's the one storing up wisdom for the upright. He's storing it up. If God's storing something up, it's going to be good stuff, because he keeps good stuff, and he stores up lots of it. Excellent. Upright, of course, is a parallel for those who are walking in integrity. Interesting, though, you see that he stores up sound wisdom. What's that parallel with?
Knowledge and understanding.
In the shield. The shield.
Oh, the shield.
The shield. What's a shield do? Protects you from something.
Yeah.
Keeps you safe. Arrows are flying your direction. Someone's swinging a sword at you. God's sound wisdom is a shield against those things. Protects you. False ideas and lies that the world will be telling you, motivated, of course, by Satan himself. If we know the truth of God's word, it strikes against a shield and doesn't hurt us. Because we know better. Faith. And again, who is it that's storing up that wisdom and giving us that shield? That he, of course, is the Lord himself. Again, the grace of God protecting us. For the upright, for those who walk in integrity. Excellent. And he has the continuing of thought. Guarding the paths of justice. Watching over the way of his saints. Guarding, shield, we have that kind of idea already. The paths of justice, watching over the way of his saints. Paths of justice being the way of the saints. Justice. Righteousness.
Mine says the path of judgment.
Right judgment, right understanding is the idea of thinking of it that way. So that it is he who is going to be keeping us in the way of the upright and the way of integrity. It's that whole olive grace thing again. We're going to be walking rightly, pursuing righteousness. We are completely dependent on God for it again, which is why earlier we are supposed to call out for understanding, cry out to God for it. The source is beyond us.
Speaking of keeping the way of whatever and what you just said.
Okay.
The path of judgment.
Yes, there we go.
That little girl that ended up missing in Bloomington.
Okay.
And they still haven't found her. Her parents are FBI agents and they still haven't found her. Ariel said, we walked that way all the time when she was in Bloomington. 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. Everybody does it. It's not like it was a big thing. And she said, but the difference was when she was coming through, most of her friends were drunk or high. She said, and we were coming from the library, you know? And that's...
You know the library was a source of such things, but then go ahead.
Yeah, you can get high anywhere in Bloomington, let me tell you.
It's like reading the air, you know. Well,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So, and I said, don't you see how God was protecting you? You're walking the same path that this poor little girl has walked. But you got where you were supposed to be because you were doing what you were supposed to do, and God had mercy on you. But this girl who liked to live in debauchery, we don't know where she is. But when you can look back at where you've been and see how God has brought you, I mean, I have done that. Look back on your life and see how God has brought you through some things and protected you from some things that he didn't protect other people from, then you know, thank you, Jesus. Your heart is filled with thanksgiving.
There, but for the grace of God, go on.
Exactly.
It's that issue of grace again, his mercy.
Yes.
See, all over the place. And that's the perspective we really need to have.
Right.
Because we don't just walk along life's path and just kind of happenstance end up wherever we're going. No, we are there because of the hand of God directing us, even though we don't realize it sometimes.
Right.
But we need to discipline ourselves to realize it. To think in those kind of terms.
Even when you know you shouldn't be out at 1 o'clock in the
Somebody's
morning.
having a birthday.
That's God.
Ah, okay. Right on. Rejoicing together. You have to love it. Then, verse 9. Then, again, after the if statements of 1 through 4, as God is guarding us and shielding us and protecting us along life's paths into righteousness, then you will understand righteousness and justice and equity, every good path. That should sound familiar to you. Part of the purpose of the book, verse 3, chapter 1, that we would have righteousness and justice and equity, every good path. It's like, this is what the purpose of it is. And how are you going to get it? Verses 4 all the way through chapter 2, verse 8. This is what it takes. Understand righteousness, understand justice, understand equity. That is what the result is. Every good path. It's going to run the full gamut of ethical behavior that leads to life, peace, and prosperity. Every bit of it, he says. The path. I like this understanding of the path. Think of it as cart tracks or wagon ruts. Old times, you have a sort of a muddy path, the wagons or the chariot or the footprints or whatever. They're walking through it and it dries out at its heart. And especially if it's wagon ruts, next time another vehicle or something goes by there, of course it's going to end up in the ruts. It's a well-worn, carved-out path. A well-worn, carved-out path that we need to follow without inserting our own ideas.
Like a road that's winter.
Yes.
Ruts and you don't get out.
Pretty much. Or snow-covered streets in Indianapolis when it's negative 15 after a foot of snow. Yes.
It was good when once one car gets in the rut, the other cars can just drive along on top of it, right? It's just weird.
Well, quick, maybe. Anyway, that's okay. Now, the well-worn path. 4, wisdom will come into your heart and knowledge will be pleasant to your soul. Wisdom parallel with knowledge. Coming into your heart, being pleasant to your soul. Parallel there. It's pleasant because it is desirable, it is good, it is what is... it's just someone who truly is born again, who truly does know Christ. The word of God, this wisdom really is sweeter than honey. It's It's precious, it's desirable, it's what we really want. We begin to see how much of a counterfeit pleasure this world offers, that it really doesn't satisfy. It really can't.
But when you get a pleasant knowledge from the Lord, it releases endorphins. You know, you're just like, at least I am. I'm just like, oh, Lord, thank you, you know? And yeah.
But what troubles me, and the troubles about me, is we have those experiences, right? We have those experiences to see how precious God is as He's revealed His truth to us, as we've sought it out in His Word and prayer, and yet then we become satisfied with lesser things.
We get lazy. We're sheep.
Sheep aren't all that bright. But we know where the fountain of life is. It's the Jeremiah 2 thing. I don't know when I said the Jeremiah 2 thing. I posted that earlier.
Yeah.
Something on Facebook, but Jeremiah 2, God tells His people they've committed a couple of those sins. They've forsaken Him, the fountain of living water, the infinite mountain stream, source of pure, clean, refreshing water. It just sounds good. What have they done? They've broken themselves cisterns, broken cisterns that can't hold any water. So what you're doing then, He says, instead of going to me, the source of everlasting life, of richness, of joy, of pleasure, of sustenance, you're going to wallow around in the mud at the bottom of your broken cistern and somehow think you've gotten a drink. There's the comparison God gives. But we do it!
But we can't stay there.
Spirit will slap us upside the head and bring us back.
We gotta
Thank God for that. But again, I think that points back to what we were reading earlier, why we need to cry out to God for wisdom, for understanding, to seek it as hidden treasure, because our tendency, as foolish as it is and as brainless as it is to wallow around in the bottom of a broken cistern and play in the mud and think we're satisfied. C.S. Lewis, for all the problems that he had, did say something thoughtful on the matter, which is really very, very good. It's like we are content to sit as children and play with mud pies in the slum because we have little idea of what it means to have a holiday at sea. We are far too easily pleased. Yes, we are. Let us not be satisfied with anything less than what God Himself has for us. Sin loses its allurement when we have that understanding. Discretion, verse 11, will watch over you. Understanding will guard you. Discretion, wise practice. The godly heart is formed. Wisdom will come into your heart, verse 10. And it will help protect from temptations. Wicked men and wicked women will seek to seduce us to their ways. Will, not might, will. Live in this world for 5 minutes, you understand that. But this understanding will guard us, will protect us. We desperately need that protection and shield. And that is all the then statements. And now we move into the deliverance statements with verses 12 through 15. Delivering you from the way of evil, from men of perverted speech, who forsake the paths of uprightness, to walk in the ways of darkness, who rejoice in doing evil and delight in the perverseness of evil, men whose paths are crooked and who are devious in their ways. Delivering from the way of evil, from men of perverted speech. Men of perverted speech and the way of evil are parallel with each other. Perverted speech is definitely way of evil. If we speaking evil things leads to larger evil things. And this deliverance, this rescue, snatching away, liberate out of something from being bound up and held fast in it. That's what Solomon was getting to throughout verses 1 through 11. Now, all this stuff having been true, if you passionately pursue wisdom, then you will be blessed in heaven, and you will be rescued and delivered as a result. An antithetical parallelism in verse 13. The perverted speech, men of perverted speech, those whose way is evil, they forsake the paths of uprightness to walk in the ways of darkness. Uprightness and darkness, opposite each other. Forsaking and walking, opposite of each other. To highlight it, the path of uprightness is not the way of darkness. It doesn't even look like it. Might be tempted to think it is sometimes. And the need to cry out to God for understanding and clarity of mind. But they're very different. They are opposite. What does righteousness have in common with evil? Nothing, but we like to think it does. It's that broken cistern idea again. And he intensifies it. Not only do they walk in the ways of darkness, it just kind of happens to be the path that they're on. No. What does verse 14 say? Somebody bring out verse 14 again, please.
Who delight in doing evil and rejoice in the diversity of evil.
They like it. Oh, they really like it. They pursue it. They rejoice in it. It makes them happy. They delight in it. It's what they are working toward. They have an inward rottenness that is very much exposed here in that verse. They're glad, they're merry, they're happy. They have exuberant, enthusiastic, spontaneous shouts of joy associated with such things. It's what they want. It's what their lifestyle
They
is.
brag about getting away with something.
Oh, sure. They glory in their shame. Believe in Jesus. Did Jesus say that? I think it was in Paul, somewhere in the New Testament. But they glory in things they're shameful. It is their delight. And they brag about it, as you said, Brother Joe. And we think, wow, that doesn't really sound good. That's not how it's supposed to be. Exactly, it's opposite of pursuing righteousness. But why the warning here? Because of the temptation that exists in the world to entice us into these kinds of things. Isn't that how it was in chapter 1? Sinners are going to come along and to entice you. It's going to be subtle, at least try to be. That's why we need this shield, this protection, this knowledge, this crying out to God. It all fits together. Proverbs typically, like I mentioned before, sometimes in early parts of the book, there's more context to it, the theme. But there's little couplets, well, especially chapters 12 and following. Not much context that can be taken as little individual verses and used for their wisdom in that regard. But the truth is they really do all fit together. There is a common theme, an underlying necessity that we have. This wisdom comes from God, and it is there because of the wicked allurement that exists in this world that will take us under if we don't have it. We are not as strong as we think we are. These men are crooked. Paths are crooked or devious in their ways. They do not fear the Lord. They despise the Lord. They do not trust His word. They trust their own devious, evil, oppressive conduct. The Lord does find them repulsive, which we'll get to in Proverbs 3. But it is just the opposite once again. We've got to keep going back to chapter 1, verse 7, because it governs all of this. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. What's the rest of the verse? Fools despise wisdom and understanding. They despise it. What do they delight in instead? Just read it. They delight in doing evil, and they rejoice in perverseness. Not in what God says. They despise it. Typically, they're not going to come flat out and say that they despise it. You ask them enough why questions, probably get to that point. They get really angry at you. That happens. But the idea is deception. It's deviousness. It's not going to be obvious on the surface. It is an enticement. It is an allurement. So cry out to God. Internalize His word. Read it. Study it. Memorize it so that it is available to us. And it's, well, I don't think that looks quite right. You start thinking that you're probably right. It's not right. Don't ignore those warning signs.
And remember, without God, we would be just like them. And be thankful that God has allowed us to have that wisdom and that knowledge and safeguards us. There's nothing in us that deserves it.
Grace.
I found something yesterday that you might be interested in.